This is the Confused Mother podcast, and I'm your host, Gitanjali More. Today's guest is Maggie Towe. She is a registered dietitian and an international board certified lactation consultant. She has degrees from Vanderbilt University and Colorado State University in the USA, and also from Potsdam University in Germany. She has completed a pediatric nutrition fellowship at Indianapolis Children's Hospital to specialize in infant and pediatric feeding. In addition to her professional qualifications, Maggie has breastfed both her children for 2 years and enjoys triathlons and ballet in her free time. Wow. Maggie's been living in Berlin with her family since 2011. Her goal is to help families by providing evidence-based but also compassionate nutrition and lactation support so that families can define and follow their feeding and wellness goals.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Maggie, and telling us about your experience and maybe even answering some FAQs related to lactation problems. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work and also what brought you to Germany?
Thank you also for having me here today. I'm really excited to chat with you about lactation and breastfeeding and my experiences around the world. As you said, I'm originally from Colorado in the US, but I have lived actually in Japan, in France, in Switzerland, England, and now Germany. So
Oh, wow.
I did teach English as a second language in Japan, and I studied French as my first degree. So that is the reason I lived in those other countries. And my husband is British. And we met in Japan,
Okay.
and I lived in England with him as well. And he is the reason we transferred to Berlin. So we've been here since 2011. My girls were
Okay.
both born in Indianapolis in the US. So I have experience in the US hospital birthing system, and they are now
Yeah.
12 and 14 years old. Yeah,
Okay, so you're definitely long past the phase of breastfeeding
I am.
yourself. But tell me, did you also work as a consultant in all of these other countries that you've lived in?
When I returned from Japan, I went back to university to study nutrition, which is a passion that I've had my whole life because I came from this background of being a swimmer and a dancer. So I've always been interested in nutrition. In the
Wow.
US, we study the whole nutrition in the life cycle, and I decided to specialize in pediatrics and pregnancy and infant nutrition. So after I graduated from that degree, I spent 3 or 4 years working within the Women, Infants, and Children's program. This is a low income supplemental nutrition and breastfeeding support program in the United States. And we see pregnant women, postpartum, infants, and children up to age 5 to make sure that they're getting breastfeeding support, but also supplemental foods like
Uh-huh.
carrots, milk, eggs, butter, and also formula when needed. So I worked in this community program for several years. And then I did a specialized pediatric nutrition fellowship program where I trained even more specialized in every area of peds. And then I worked in a newborn intensive care unit as a dietitian in Indianapolis before we moved here.
Okay, okay. But I want to talk to you today primarily about your work as a lactation consultant because breastfeeding is such a complicated issue. I think that people don't even realize how complicated it can be. It doesn't have to be, but it can be really complicated. And I think even I didn't think about it because when I was pregnant, a lot of people were like, "Oh yeah, don't worry about it. Everything's gonna fine. The baby will know what to do." And then someone else said, "Oh yeah, as soon as the baby's born, you should try and get them to like put them on the breast, and then it'll work. Don't worry." So they try to take away your worries, which I understand, but then it also takes away the I don't know. I think the kind of importance of knowing what to do or how to breastfeed.
Absolutely agree with you about what you said. We try to take away pregnant women's worries because you already have a lot to worry about. You're worrying also about the delivery. You're worrying about, oh, where am I going where am I going to put this baby, in my apartment, or how are we going to have the right equipment? How will we go to appointments? How will this new family member fit into our family? So breastfeeding is often not thought of when we're pregnant, and when people ask about it, oh, don't worry about it. We'll just it'll be fine when it comes, and we can talk about that later. But my role, my role as an
Yeah.
lactation consultant is that I'm an expert in breastfeeding and lactation care, and I want to help support breastfeeding for families and promote excellent health and growth. So I am an international board certified lactation consultant. So this is a special type of lactation consultant. It means that I've completed over 95 hours of education, as well as a certain number of contact hours with breastfeeding families, and that I come from a medical or a health background. Additionally, I've passed a 4-hour exam, and I have to retake this exam every 5 years. I've been an IBCLC since 2009. And funny thing about that is I was studying for this exam after I had my first baby. And when I took the exam, I was still breastfeeding. So during the pause, and of course, because it is a lactation exam, they assume there will be many women who are taking this exam who are breastfeeding or lactating. I did have to pump during the exam. So that is kind of an interesting little tidbit about my personal experience with taking the exam. But going forward with my work as a lactation consultant, what I really do is families typically contact me for an in-home or a virtual consultation. And I come to homes and I assess mom and baby. I take a look at baby's current weight, look inside the mouth, take a look at mom's nipples. I take a medical history, a birth history, and then I help to observe and assist with a feed and offer suggestions on adjustments and how to make it better for mom and baby. So I bring a scale and other breastfeeding support tools such as nipple shields and pumping parts. And at the end of a consult, I make a plan with the family for the next week or so, and then we follow up in person or via email. And I always send a written care plan, because if you remember what it's like after you've had a baby, you can't remember anything.
No way. we had so many lists when our baby was born. Shopping lists, things to remember, things we need to do. We even wrote down kind of routines that we needed to to ensure that we were sticking to, just because we couldn't think of everything. It's just impossible to remember stuff then. Yeah, I get it.
You're like, can I just remember to shower yourself, So of course I write everything down for families. And then I also refer those families out to other health professionals when needed. And that's part of my role as a lactation consultant as well.
Very interesting, because I mean we also had a consultation. For me, I had a terrible experience with breastfeeding, and I remember saying, in fact, I just remembered it while you were talking. Having this conversation with my husband, I said, "Is this going to hurt for one full year? Because in that case, I'm out. I'm not doing this." Because I had no idea
Absolutely.
about what it was supposed to feel like. And then somewhere I read, if it's hurting, it's not right. That means something needs to be fixed. And that's when I realized, oh my God, okay, this is not normal. This is not what I have to do for a year. And I'm saying a year because I had decided for myself that I would feed for up to a year, and then I wanted to stop. Obviously, every mother decides that for herself, but yeah. So, what are some of the most common issues that parents face when they contact you? And also, would be interesting in the next if you could also talk a little bit about the myths around breastfeeding. What kind of beliefs have you heard from people?
Okay. First of all, I'm so sorry to hear that your breastfeeding journey was painful and you didn't feel you had the support that you needed to reach your breastfeeding goals. And like you said, every woman has their own goals, and that's I feel my main role as a lactation consultant. And that's a question I always ask families. What is your goal for breastfeeding? What do you want to achieve? And how can we come up with a plan to help you achieve that? So that I'm so sorry to hear that was a struggle for you. And yeah.
Yeah, it was really bad. I mean, we took her to an osteopath to get her jaw checked out because I've heard that
Mm-hmm.
that also somehow, affects babies. And my midwife was unfortunately just not helpful at all. And then finally, with the one lactation consultant that we worked with, it finally happened. Like a week later, somehow
Wonderful.
magically it just fell into place, but it took almost 7 weeks for everything to fall into place. So yeah,
Yeah.
it was not good. And when I started talking to other women about it, they were all like, oh my god, yes, oh, don't talk to me about this is horrific. I can't even tell you what all I
Mm,
went through. It took me 6 weeks. Oh, it took 8 weeks. I almost gave up, or I actually gave
yeah.
up and switched to the
Right.
bottle. So
So
yeah.
I think it sounds to me like nipple pain or nipple soreness was your primary issue that was going on for you. And that
Yeah.
is, I would say that's one of the top reasons that people do contact me.
Hmm.
And yeah, that's one of the main issues. And you're right, absolutely. What you heard, that it should not hurt, is true. It may feel
Yeah.
uncomfortable or unusual because we haven't had this sensation before unless you're a second time breastfeeding mom, which again, this every baby is
Mm.
different, every baby is new, and every experience, every pregnancy, every delivery is different. So even if you've been a breastfeeding mom before, the second time is not necessarily going to be the same. And so that's important to keep in mind for women who've had a poor experience, but also who've had a easy cruisy experience, to
Yeah.
remember that,
Hmm.
it is important to get help. The first signs of pain, because breastfeeding shouldn't be painful, but it is an experience where this baby's learning and you're learning to work together.
Yeah.
So one of the
Hmm.
things I always recommend is to take a prenatal breastfeeding class, and they may be included in your birth prep class. Most people do take a birthing preparation class, but sometimes breastfeeding preparation is not part of that. So I do offer those prenatally virtually, and sometimes La Leche League will also offer those, or some of the hospitals offers those as well. Reading lots of
Hmm.
books like The Womanly Art of Breastfeeding, that's from La Leche League. If you don't know what La Leche League is, it's a group that offers mostly free support, breastfeeding support groups for women. Um, or
Yeah.
Biological Nursing by Suzanne Colson. Those are some good things to read when you're pregnant. And there's some really great videos from Global Health Media where
Hmm.
you can see how to latch your baby and how to position your baby. So the main
Maggie, we should make a list
Sure.
of these books that you just mentioned and put them in the show
Yeah,
notes because
absolutely.
this is invaluable information that you're giving
Absolutely.
out
I
there.
will be
Hmm.
happy to provide those because these are ones that you
Yeah.
can read. You're pregnant and you're in the bath and you're just chilling out. And that's what I did. I
Yeah.
had all this experience, but I did a lot of reading when I was pregnant about breastfeeding, because even though we always hear it's a natural process, it is still something that we need to learn with our
Yeah.
baby. So, yeah, that's one of the first issues that comes up. Another issue that people contact me about is I don't have enough milk. And this is
Hmm.
something that can be perceived or it can be real. There are a lot of interventions, but also medical issues that can lead to low milk supply. And
Hmm.
most of the time, the low milk supply is a result of just not breastfeeding enough in the beginning. And moms aren't told
Ah,
that we need to
okay.
bring that baby to the breast constantly. Just bring the baby to the breast, and again, get help if it's painful, because the more you bring the baby to the
Yeah.
breast when it's painful, the more damage you do, and then the less you want to bring the baby to the breast, and that is this vicious cycle, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I get
So
it.
so
Hmm.
that's the
And I mean, in the initial days, I remember feeding her 10, 12 times a
exactly.
day. And for ages, she would just be
Yeah.
there and not let go. And I would just be like, okay,
Yeah.
let's get on with
Well,
it.
those are some of those things. Is That's a little bit, maybe we could talk about it in terms of a myth. It's like, just baby should be at the breast 24 hours a day. Well, actually, not exactly. We want baby to be feeding efficiently at the breast. And how do we recognize that is something that moms or families should be taught before leaving the hospital or before delivery is, can you hear baby swallowing? Can you see baby's jaw dropping down? Can you, or is the baby sucking at the nipple like a pacifier in these little quick, or can you actually see that jaw dropping down and it looks like they are actually
Right.
swallowing? And is
Working
right.
on it.
And
Yeah.
do you feel this kind of strong pulling sensation at the breast coming from deep inside, not pain on the
Yeah.
nipple? And is baby actually peeing and pooping
Right.
and
Of
gaining
course.
weight? So those are the things we're looking for. So it's not that baby should just be 24 hours on the breast. And I think a lot of women do hear that at the hospital. The nurses or whoever may be helping with breastfeeding at the hospital may say, just make sure baby's on the breast. Well, this also,
Without specifying
yes, it
anything
must be
else.
also
Yeah.
efficient feeding at the breast, not just hanging out there. And this excessive prolonged time of 25 to 30
Yeah.
to an hour and a half is
Yeah. Yeah.
is not working for moms or babies.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a myth,
I
I guess, but
understand.
also it ties in with that issue about the low milk supply. Um, yeah, did you hear any, are there myths? You know, what I like to ask sometimes to families, actually, because I work with so many different international families, is what do you hear from your moms or other women who are in your culture and they are breastfeeding? Because it's so different in different countries. And that is very interesting to me. What were some of the myths that you heard from like your family or your culture that you later realized wasn't true at all?
In my case, there was nothing because
Ah,
I had not really talked about it with anyone. It's
mm,
just, because as an Indian, breastfeeding is not something you talk about openly.
okay.
Yeah. It's just like it'll happen.
Aha.
You'll figure it out.
Mm,
And I remember that my mother was here the first month after my baby was born, and she supported me in whatever way.
mm,
So a few things that she said was that you need to have obviously nutritious food, things like dates and nuts and slightly high calorie food so
mm.
that you have energy. And she would make me good healthy options, so you know that we have ghee in India, the
Yes.
clarified butter, so she would make all the food with that. She would make me a lot of porridge. She
Mm,
gave me a lot of like nut powders to put in my food, things like that. So yeah, but another thing that I remember now in terms of myths is spicy food,
mm.
that you shouldn't eat spicy food when you're breastfeeding,
Absolutely.
because it affects the baby's digestion. Another thing that I heard, but it was quite funny. So it was at a stage where I wasn't feeding her so much anymore, every like 5 hours or so. So
Hmm.
I could have an occasional glass of wine. And the lady was like, she saw that my daughter was only 9 months, I think, at the time, and she brought me a warm glass of wine, and it was white wine. So I was a bit grossed out because who drinks white wine warm? And she was like, no, 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 because I know that you're breastfeeding. And I looked at my husband. I said, what does that have to do with anything? And then I looked it up, and apparently this is a myth that if you are breastfeeding, you should not consume anything cold because
Mm.
that can give the child a cold.
So, yeah.
And yeah, fascinating myths, but
Yeah.
nothing that I believe, because it just sounded so ridiculous. I said, okay, there has to be some science to it, otherwise I'm not going to buy it. Uh,
This is so true. I've never heard the warm wine, but in terms of cold or warm foods, this is definitely a cultural thing that in
yeah,
some cultures after delivery you should only have warm foods for 40 days. And
yeah,
and that there is no evidence behind that is science based in any way, but it is a
yeah,
cultural belief and it's not harmful, so it's absolutely fine if people want to follow that rule for themselves. The
yeah,
spicy foods is also absolutely okay for babies to have, of course, and
yeah,
in fact I think, especially if you are from a culture that eats spicy foods, it would be so strange for you to suddenly not. So during the pregnancy, you were eating all your spicy foods, of course, and baby was getting these flavors based effectively through you during the pregnancy.
Exactly.
And this is one of the wonderful benefits of breastfeeding is baby is also exposed through breastfeeding to these wonderful flavors. And we hope, and we have some evidence that shows that later these breastfed babies are less picky eaters because they have been exposed to more variety of foods. So spicy foods, not an issue during breastfeeding. That is a question I get a lot. And what can I eat? And effectively just making sure your food is safe, that we don't want to eat, maybe slightly, we're not sure, is this deli meat okay? Or some,
of course, like not eating anything sketchy. let's just put it that way.
Exactly. Don't eat sketchy foods. And the wine.
I think that's a rule for life.
Yes, that's true.
Like, just try and stay away from sketchy food.
Yeah. And the wine that, of course, with the drinking alcohol during breastfeeding, that is, of course, another topic that if you do, of course, it's not recommended that you drink when you're breastfeeding, but occasionally a glass of wine is okay. And the ideal time to have that is actually when you are breastfeeding, because you are currently giving the milk, which has absolutely zero alcohol in it. You're drinking at the same time. And then depending on the size of your body, and we can never say exactly how long it takes a single person to digest or process that alcohol, but an hour per drink is kind of the usual that is said, then you are generally safe before the next feed, which may be 3 hours later, unless you have a brand new newborn, which may be 1.5 hours later. So probably not a great idea to be drinking right after delivery at all.
I think also like staying away from alcohol initially after delivery makes sense because your body is already in a weakened state.
Absolutely.
You don't want to weaken it more. You want to put healthy food in there so that you can regenerate and recover.
Yeah. I love that your mom was there.
Energy.
I love that your mom was there helping you by giving, I think it's wonderful that when we have the support of families, and that's what the families can help with. They can help with cleaning, they can help with cooking, and we do need a little bit more calories when we're breastfeeding. It's not a lot, but dates and nuts and those kinds of healthy foods rather than grabbing cookies or chocolate for that extra 300 calories.
Don't worry, I did enough of that as well. I did a lot of that as well. So it was a good combination of, I ate a little healthy breakfast today, so now I can eat a chocolate. I justified it that way.
Yeah, there are also these cravings that sometimes come up when we're, not getting a lot of sleep. I think it's much more associated with sleep deprivation than anything else.
Yeah, that's true. That is definitely everything that I can relate to, and I'm now almost getting nostalgic about my entire breastfeeding journey. And I just have to think they're so sweet when they just fall asleep while they're breastfeeding and they just lie there, and they're completely spaced out and just fall asleep while breastfeeding. And that was initially a very common occurrence with us, and I think that a lot of women face that. But another thing that I was thinking about is the role of the partner. And the reason I thought about it was because I was talking to another mom recently, and I said to her that I don't think men understand our need to wean off the babies, to stop breastfeeding, because they think that, it's just because you want to get drunk again. But, towards the end, I was so done.
Yeah.
And I've heard this from a lot of people. I heard this other mom that I met, she was like, woohoo, I'm done. And, she was just rejoicing at having her body back for herself. And so my question to you is, when you talk about, breastfeeding with couples, how do you make sure that the males in the relationship are also equally well informed and they kind of find their place in the whole breastfeeding journey?
That is a good question. I do work with lots of different types of families. So sometimes it is the partners are same-sex partners, or there may not be a partner, or the partners might be a combination of families that have, they living or working in a mixed family, or the the partners might be like a mother that is in the picture. And it's just important to keep those partners there in the topic of conversation. I really enjoy having the partner there for the lactation consult if they feel comfortable to be present. And I include them in my care plan. And we talk about how can this partner also be supportive of breastfeeding in the beginning. So I always talk about, it really can be very helpful if you like to massage the woman's back at the time that she's breastfeeding, because that can really help her to release the tension that is making it hard for her to have a letdown and give this amazing milk to the baby. What else can partners do to be helpful? They can be the ones that are cooking or cleaning. They can always be making sure that she has enough water, that water is there when she's breastfeeding. But also talking about what is this family's goal for feeding this child. You talked about 1 year was what you had in your head.
Yeah.
And sometimes that 1 year has been placed upon you by society. Okay, the World Health Organization says exclusive breastfeeding until 6 months, and then continued breastfeeding until at least 1 year or beyond, or as long as desired. I always say, it's as long as desired by the family. It's not just the woman, the family also, or the partner also may have some input, but they should be supportive of one another. So coming to that point where you feel done, it's important to have that conversation with your partner saying, I originally thought, for example, in your case, maybe, or you did make it 2 year. I don't know. How long did you?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. I made it to a year, and she had her last feed 2 days after her first.
Okay, so congratulations on reaching your breastfeeding goals, and that's a conversation to have with your partner is, this is my goal, but actually our situation has changed. I've given this amazing gift from birth until 3 months, and it's been wonderful, but it's not working in our family dynamic. And that's something I always talk about with families. You have to prioritize. We can't do everything. And there's this pressure from all over now about moms or families being these super families doing absolutely everything. And it's not possible. So keeping that realistic idea and that conversation open with the partner is really important so that women don't feel trapped in a feeding situation that they don't want to be in.
Maggie, you mentioned something about doing a birthing course, but also a lactation course. So, is that something you offer, like information about breastfeeding before the baby is born?
I do.
Because it seems that the intervention as a lactation consultant is already when the parents are suffering. When the mother is already going through a tough time, trying to fix the latch or whatever the issue may be. But how can they be kind of preventive in the breastfeeding journey?
That is a great question. I do offer private one-on-one prenatal breastfeeding courses, and I would love to offer, for example, once a month in Berlin, a virtual prenatal breastfeeding class. So it's a great idea. And I will try to get that set up as soon as possible. That way people can just join from their own homes and really learn the basics about what to expect in the hospital, what to expect in those first 2 weeks when it's really intense, and what to know what to do. But people can always contact me to have a private one as well, one-on-one.
Yeah. I think that would be a really helpful resource, for expecting parents to kind of also ask all their questions or get some, breastfeeding 101 in a 1 hour session while their heads are still clear, and they can prepare accordingly. So, Maggie, here's my last question to you. You know that this podcast is called The Confused Mother. So, if you have one piece of advice for the confused mothers out there, what would it be?
So, my one piece of advice for the confused mothers would be to trust yourself, but also to have compassion for yourself and for others. Don't put so much pressure on yourself that everything has to be perfect. It's not all black and white, and we have steps forward and steps backward, and it's okay. at the first
Yeah.
sign of problems, specific to mothering, I think. Specific to lactation, at the first sign of pain or problems, seek specialized help from an IBCLC, from a lactation consultant, so that you don't continue to
Yeah.
suffer.
Great advice, Maggie. Don't like no putting pressure on yourself is something that I wrote about on Instagram, and I've got, my head is full of all of these things that I put myself under pressure with as well, and so it's easier said than done, but definitely valuable advice. Thank you so much, Maggie, for this conversation. I feel like we can talk for
Absolutely.
hours on end
Yeah.
about breastfeeding. And while we were talking, I got another 15 or 20 ideas and questions, but I think that let's leave it at that for now. And maybe we can find time to do another session where we talk about another aspect of lactation and breastfeeding and
I
pediatric
would love
nutrition.
that. Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful to talk to you about breastfeeding and the support that I can give to families to help them reach their feeding goals.
If you liked this interview, why not subscribe to my channel? Share the story with anyone you think might be interested in it. To support my work, you can do so for just the price of a coffee. You can find the information in the show notes. Thank you.